Welcome to Absolute Trust Talk with your host, Kirsten Howe. Absolute Trust Talk brings you tips, tools, advice, and interviews to help you build a reliable knowledge base on estate planning, business, and finance to start preparing for your future today.
Hello and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I'm Kirsten Howe. I'm the host here at Absolute Trust Council. And today we're going to follow up with my guest, Jirayr Kembikian, who is a Bitcoin expert, a CFP, a wealth advisor with Citrine Capital. And we talked last week about sort of the origins and kind of the basics behind cryptocurrency in general and Bitcoin in particular. This week, we're going to focus a little bit more on the different ways that people can own Bitcoin and the pluses and minuses of each of those. That's where we're going to start. So Jirayr, welcome. Thank you for coming back and talking to me some more about this fascinating topic. You started at kind of toward the end of our last episode introducing this topic, which is the three different ways, buckets you call them, that people can own Bitcoin. So I'm going to let you take over the conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back. So as I was touching on, there are many different ways you can acquire and hold Bitcoin. They each come with their own unique trade-offs. And the first approach, in my opinion, is the easiest approach, which is, as of last year, Bitcoin ETFs were approved. So this is a ETF wrapper similar to a mutual fund, which everyone is familiar with usually. So inside this exchange traded fund, there is a Bitcoin in that fund. So that's the easiest way. Fidelity and BlackRock are the two biggest names in the ETF space that have a Bitcoin specific ETF. And this would fit inside your traditional brokerage account, a joint account, IRA account. So very similar to how most folks hold the majority of their assets. And this is the easiest, maybe I would argue the cleanest way to own Bitcoin. There are trade-offs, just like everything else, but this is by far the easiest way.
And the ETF, it's based on Bitcoin, so it rises and falls as Bitcoin rises and falls.
Exactly. So you're getting basically the price exposure and the price action of Bitcoin. It's also important to notate that while I mentioned the Fidelity and Bitcoin are what's called spot Bitcoin, meaning they're holding actual Bitcoin in their funds, there's also futures markets or derivative markets placed on Bitcoin, which are not owning actual Bitcoin. They're essentially betting that
they're betting on Bitcoin or betting against Bitcoin. Yeah.
And that is different, often more expensive, more complex, and in our opinion, not favorable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So go ahead and talk to us about the pluses and minuses of owning your Bitcoin via an ETF.
Yep. So this is going to be the most traditional means. So this is going to be the easiest form for folks to move forward with. And similar to how the traditional financial or brokerage system works, you can title these accounts very similarly to how you would have your other accounts. If you have a trust, you can title them in the name of your trust. If you have beneficiaries that you want to update for these accounts for your retirement accounts, very clean and straightforward. And there's really no complexity apart from simply buying the Bitcoin ETF and then holding it in these accounts.
Yeah, it's very familiar. We know how to go online and trade in and out of our Fidelity accounts. It's just all the same. So got it. Except the underlying investment is a little different. Okay, the downside.
Well, the downside is Bitcoin purists would argue that it's not actual Bitcoin that you hold in your possession. So there still potentially could be some risks. And depending on the ETF that you're selecting, they all have their different flavors of where they are custodying the Bitcoin. They have their expenses within the ETFs that you need to pay for. So there are different trade-offs. And depending on how comfortable or uncomfortable you might be with custodying Bitcoin yourself versus handing it off to a trusted custodian, that is a known risk or a known trade-off.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So second bucket.
The second bucket is maybe the most common, at least historically, until this is starting to change.
Until the ETFs came out. Yeah.
Exactly. Until the ETFs came out, which was only last year, although those have exploded in popularity.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the second bucket is buying Bitcoin on an exchange. And this was really the main way and the only way to acquire it. And that's why it's become the most popular over time. So this might be a Coinbase or Robinhood that most folks have heard of. and you're buying it on an exchange. And this presents multiple trade-offs in our opinion. However, let me start with a recommendation on if you are pursuing it from an exchange perspective. We really recommend working with an exchange that is Bitcoin only, meaning it's not serving other cryptocurrencies. And from that perspective, you have minimized the risk or attack vectors potentially. So think of any product where you're focusing on one thing versus literally hundreds or thousands of things to be able to secure that and custody that and whatnot. So we feel the risk is substantially smaller and maybe even eliminated if you're working with a Bitcoin only exchange.
Plus, Bitcoin itself is inherently less vulnerable than the other cryptos. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
To continue on that path, the recommendation is really do your research on where you are buying them, in the sense of we want to make sure that this custodian has had no history of locking out customers, that they have good customer service, that there is no history of theft or loss of funds. And unfortunately, this has plagued the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space over time.
When you use the word custodian, is that what Robinhood and Coinbase are?
Yes, they are an exchange.
Okay, that's what you're talking about. Okay.
Exactly. They're also a custodian. So you can not only buy your Bitcoin or crypto on there, but you can potentially also leave it on there.
Store it there. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's what you mean by custodian. Okay.
Exactly. So the trade-offs, as I already mentioned, is you want to make sure that you're working with a Bitcoin-only exchange. There is risk historically where folks have lost their funds or not been able to access their funds for a variety of reasons. This also, if you're keeping your Bitcoin on an exchange, we believe that's the worst form of ownership in comparison to the total of 3 options. So we feel it's the worst option because, as I mentioned, people have lost control of their Bitcoin. There's often a phrase used in the Bitcoin world that says, not your keys, not your coins, meaning we want to own our keys to access the Bitcoin ourselves. And we want to make sure that no matter what happens, even if it's not fraud, that we have access and it's our responsibility to properly store our Bitcoin. So there are tremendous trade-offs with this approach. And I'll continue. There's also potential financial planning or estate planning risks in keeping your Bitcoin on an exchange where, depending on the custodian, some do not allow you to title your accounts in the name that you want, which, as we know in this community, presents potential risks.
Sure.
On how you're passing that down over time. Beneficiaries are not always available on these accounts. And there's additional layers of problems that simply don't exist with the traditional brokerage world.
Okay. Which leads us to bucket number 3.
So bucket number 3, which we believe is superior. However, similar to when you're first starting to learn to drive a car, it is a responsibility that takes practice and hours of proper care to make sure you're doing it safely. And the same thing goes with when you're holding Bitcoin in self-custody. And a good example of this is when you have a physical wallet, right? You keep your cash in your wallet theoretically. And this is very similar to that example where if you're taking self-custody of your Bitcoin, that means from the analogy perspective, you have the cash in your wallet versus the cash is floating in cyberspace in the bank. So that's the analogy there. The reason we feel it's superior is because, again, going back to the phrase, not your keys, not your coins. So you have access to your Bitcoin and only you have access to your Bitcoin. And for some folks and a growing amount of folks, that seems to be the preferred method and the superior method. But as we've also seen, people can lose their keys or passwords is another way to think about it. And because it's solely your responsibility with that self-custody setup, once you lose the keys,
you can't reset your password. Yeah.
Depending on your framework. Now, there are more and more mainstream and how can I put this? There are better tools that are coming online that are more for mainstream adoption that prevent things like being able to lose your keys. There are digital wallet setups. There's even insurance companies that are starting to insure these self-custody solutions. So it's a very interesting space.
Okay.
I believe that, again, it's superior. I also believe that in the next 6, 12, maybe 18 months, this space is going to continue to transform and open it up for even more mainstream adoption.
Okay. So there's a whole sort of universe of adjacent industries coming forward to help people own their Bitcoin or their crypto in a self-custodied manner.
Yes, exactly.
So that will become maybe a little easier, less daunting for somebody like me who I don't have the time or the inclination to learn as much as you. I mean, I don't think I have enough years left to learn as much as you as you know about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to add on to that, there are tools that are either starting to come online or already in existence now over the last couple of years. Make self-custody as easy as operating an iPhone, for example.
Okay.
And similar to the iPhone analogy, where most folks probably have upgraded their iPhone, so they've had to transfer their data and information from iPhone to iPhone. It's that easy. So if you can do that, there are tools that are similar that can also be set up from a self-custody wallet perspective.
Got it. And it's going to become easier and easier. I know that you, in your company, you have clients who have a variety of investments, and in your portfolios that you design for your clients, you do include Bitcoin. That is an option for your clients.
Yes, that is correct. So we have been allocating since 2020 to Bitcoin in our client portfolios, unless they opted out. And we took that very, very seriously. So just to backtrack a little bit, I mentioned that 2014, we were completely dismissive of Bitcoin, saying it's speculative. And it probably wasn't until, by the way, in 2014, the price was around hundreds of dollars per Bitcoin. And then we fast forward to maybe 2018 and really took a deep dive between 2018 and 19. And myself and my co-founder, we said, hey, we really think there's something here. We took a very deep dive, and ultimately we made the decision in 2020 to recommend this to our clients. And the large majority of them did move forward with Bitcoin. So
my question for you in that vein is, how do your clients, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, how do they own it? They are self-custodying, I'm assuming, because that's what you advocate, their Bitcoin.
So the large majority are actually not in self-custody. And while we do discuss that it is the superior method, and some have worked up to that, and some have even come to us already having self-custodied their Bitcoin, and we're adding additional optimization on their setup and overall plan. But the large majority are holding it in the bucket one, as we refer to as a Bitcoin ETF.
In an ETF. Okay. Interesting.
And yeah, the reason for that was we really wanted a system that they were comfortable with. So the ETF was the most familiar method in order to own that. And it allowed us to also not necessarily rely on the client to implement this, which, as we know, already is difficult from just a pure implementation perspective. Sure. But we also know that the self-custody route is even more overwhelming to many. We really felt that the price exposure and the unique characteristics Bitcoin brings into the portfolio were reason enough to move forward with the Bitcoin ETF. And as I mentioned, some folks have geared up or started to gear up for self-custody, maybe in addition to their brokerage allocation. And we'll talk through trade-offs of what might be an appropriate allocation for folks. We really believe, from our perspective, the only wrong answer for Bitcoin allocation is zero.
Right.
And we really go from there.
Okay. So if they're investing in Bitcoin via your firm, it's going to be an ETF that you've vetted and you're satisfied with, but you can maybe coach them a little bit if they're interested in looking at self-custody.
Yep, that definitely might come down the line. But we really feel, again, as often Bitcoiners might say, get off zero, meaning get off zero Bitcoin. And many of the folks that we work with, and aligning with our philosophy, is we try to keep a index-based approach, right? Similar to how index funds operate.
Sure.
So similar to that space, we know from a mathematical perspective on how big the overall global stock market is. We know how big the Bitcoin market is, market cap specifically. And just going by that perspective, you should have approximately a 2 or 3% Bitcoin allocation in your portfolio, simply to be market neutral. Now, if you have less than that, you are effectively betting against Bitcoin or even shorting it, which I would not want to be in that position. And if you're more optimistic, you might want to consider a larger allocation than the 2 or 3%. But that's really how we start dipping our toes in. And we believe that there's currently more risk not to own Bitcoin than there is to own Bitcoin.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's becoming a bigger piece of the overall market. And why do you want to not have some of that? Just for the fun of it, thinking about self-custodying, that's not something that I would be willing to take on. That sounds really scary and really challenging. But, a lot of knowledge needs to be acquired. But Bitcoin, the last time I looked was sometime over the weekend. It was $115,000 some dollars. So is that how much you have to get into the Bitcoin market?
That's a great question. And sometimes folks don't realize this, but Bitcoin is divisible. So one Bitcoin equals 100 million Satoshis. So similar to dollars versus cents, right? $1 equals 100 cents. And the same thing applies here. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. And realistically, most folks cannot afford to shell out 115. It's currently at 112 at the time of this recording. And most folks are similar to other investments doing dollar cost averaging strategies, where depending on your exchange or also through the Bitcoin ETF, you can buy daily, you can buy monthly in amounts as small as $10 or $100 a month. So depending on how you're buying it, it's a very digestible amount for folks.
Okay. So you can buy a few Satoshis. You don't have to buy the whole $112,000 Bitcoin. I did not know that. Okay. So it hasn't gotten to where the average person can't get in there. It's affordable.
Not yet, presumably.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jirayr, for explaining all those different ways that you can own Bitcoin. And I want to pick this up with you next time because we're not done talking about the things that I find fascinating about Bitcoin. So I hope you all will join us next time. Jirayr, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcouncil.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.
This podcast is not meant to take the place of legal advice from an attorney and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you do have a legal question or issue, please consult with an attorney.